This is Gary Atencio with CNTV, and today we're in Denver, Colorado. I am here with Meth, Toxins Alliance. Since 2019, they have been providing awareness and resources of the devastating impact of meth toxins in our homes and our lives. I'm joined by Kathy McCarty, who is a mom, founder, activist. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's really start off a little bit about kind of your past and the journey that got you here. Prior to this, you were basically a professional in the banking and lending world. You found yourself with a medical situation and stepped out for a while and decided that you would maybe gain a little income from something that all of us would do, which is renting. You pretty much soon found yourself to be a victim of something that most of us never even heard of probably and realized that existed. Share with me a little bit how this journey got started and the organization came to be.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary, for having me. It's a delight. And as you said, it's been a unique journey. And what I thought was a sensible solution by leveraging my largest asset, our home, really did turn into my worst nightmare. I did have a major health event, as you mentioned, in 2016. I needed to step away from my role in banking and finance. I had over a 30-plus year career in lending, and it affected my sight. So those were the reasons why I had to step away, because I couldn't navigate the requirements of the role. That being said, all my kids were off living their lives. My youngest went off to college, and I did choose to leverage that asset to offset a new chapter and medical expenses and things like that. And what I did is I thought I put all the right protections in place and asked all the right questions, and here we are today.
Here we are today. We're definitely going to get into this story. Yeah. Let's start off with awareness. Educating our viewers out there. First of all, basically, what is meth? We're talking about a drug that found its roots in the early 1800s. It was used back in war, and it's a legal stimulant drug since the 1970s here in the United States. Meth, crystal meth. Define for the viewers out there what that is, first of all.
Well, this particular situation took me on a journey to really learn the components of meth, and a lot of it's made basically from a lot of household items that we might find underneath our cabinet in our garage. It's highly toxic, the individual components of it, whether it's battery acid or lye or Drano, Sudafed. All these components are put together in a chemical reaction that creates a stimulant that's used for recreational purposes out in the world where people do drugs, and a lot of people are become addicted to it very easily. The component that I learned of is when meth is consumed by smoking it or manufacturing. That's where the residue that it leaves a toxic substance, literally, that permeates in the surfaces in our properties or like our homes, the materials in our homes, everything. And it doesn't just stop in our homes. It could be in our cars.
You name it.
You name it. Anywhere where people are. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you mentioned addictive. I mean, meth is highly addictive. People go to extremes to acquire it.
Right.
And so that makes it readily available for people to produce out there and make some money off of. Is that kind of a lot of the reason why we're seeing maybe an uprising in such a thing?
Well, I learned in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s that it was very common that there were meth labs in people's homes, and more of the individual person would manufacture meth. But what I've learned in more recent years is methamphetamine is being produced stronger, cheaper, and more readily across the borders, especially in Mexico, by super labs with drug cartel. And this is not something that I am navigating about as far as the addiction portion, but what I'm learning is the secondary impacts to everybody else who doesn't really know what happens to a property when meth is consumed, and then they either buy that property or they've had somebody in their home that's consumed it or manufactured it.
We're talking about some of the dangers, first of all, of the residual you talked about, people that have manufactured in a home, but even more than manufactured, just the use of it possibly in a home. Share with me some of those dangers, and what are some of the symptoms also of people that have experienced?
Great question, Gary. Thanks for asking. First, I'll go into the dangers, and I'll use my home as an example. I was told I had a water line break at the home.
Okay.
That it was minor. By statute, it was outside, and it didn't affect the usage of the water in the home. And so that seemed pretty reasonable to me. I had hired a property management company to watch over the home.
Sure.
Anyways, the next morning I was told there was some digging going on, and there was no digging discussed. So if it was minor, it seems unique that there was digging going on. And when I couldn't get a hold of the property manager, I came to the property up in Evergreen, and what I saw was shocking. There was a huge excavator on my property, big backhoe excavator, and a large 10-foot long by several feet wide by several foot deep hole.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a minor repair. So that was first and foremost a red flag. After being on the property for a little while, I wandered around behind the home. I just got a really strange feeling, and I found equipment behind the home that I could not explain. There were hoses, there were buckets, there were a couple propane tanks, there were a couple steel cylinders I did not recognize, and what I learned eventually that that was a THC extraction system.
My.
And so there was more than just meth manufacturing going on in my home. A picture to the local law enforcement gained a search warrant, which eventually in a couple days, that's when they found the meth lab in our home, which composed of chemicals and all sorts of hardware and software, or hardware and chemicals, along with over 800 grams of meth, components for the THC extraction system and other things, a small arsenal of guns. It was a very explosive situation. There was even a butane oven in my home that was used for the THC products to like bake things. So that was highly explosive. The reason why I share all this is because that's highly dangerous. The home was in the forest. It was in the foothills west of Denver. It was a very dry time. It was the fall of 2018. We had just come out of a phase 2 fire ban, and as you can tell, should my home have exploded for any reason, which is not uncommon, what I learned within a meth manufacturing situation, it puts not only my neighbors but our whole community at risk.
Not only the direct effect that those dangers have, but the indirect, like you're talking about. I mean, what is the proper treatment for a meth-infected home? And I mean, because we're talking, it's very dangerous for those that are doing the meth, but we're talking long after there's a danger.
Well, that's the part of the 100 hurdles in the first 100 days that I literally had to navigate when I learned that there was meth being cooked in the property as well as consumed. My home was a 56 restored cabin, so it was all wood, logs on the outside, wood floors, wood paneling. Wood is very porous. It's not like drywall where it's traditional that you could, in a situation where there are high concentrations, you can gut it down to the studs and then rebuild it. I had three walls, 2 of them were interior that were drywall. So it really was a whole different situation. I did go ahead and order the type of test it's to measure the levels in each room.
I mean,
and the levels were so significantly high. I had several remediation companies come up there, and most of them, they all told me they weren't really confident they could get it successful because the levels were hundreds of % above the Colorado standard here.
So depending on the levels, it'll determine if that treatment or if it can be cleaned.
That's correct.
I mean, an infected home to be treated properly, you were trying to do the right thing to do that, but I mean, how many people are not even cleaning it correctly anyway? Maybe going in and just, sponging it down. Well,
I've learned that along the way that we don't always do what's right. A lot of people do what's easy, and there's a huge financial component to all of this, and I've also learned in this process that our moral compasses are sometimes off skew, but for many people they're obviously very broken.
As we said before, the people that are addicted to this drug, they go to great lengths to get it, but the people that are making this drug are making money, so they go to great lengths. And so really there is no home out there that fits a profile for this. I mean, this can be any home, be it like you say in the forest or maybe right next to us in suburbia.
That's what I've learned. I've learned that there are no geographical or economic boundaries. You can't profile a home. You cannot profile a neighborhood, a community, a city, a state, or a rural area anymore. You can't tell that a home has had meth usage in it. You can't smell it. You can't see it. In the case of my home, once all of his belongings were gone, I could have literally just, polished it up and sold it, and nobody would have ever been the wiser.
Speaking of selling it, I mean, this is not only affecting homeowners, property management. We're talking about renters who go in after the fact. You're buying a home and you find out something like this happens. I mean, this places your investment at risk. But like you said, it places your neighbors at risk. It's a secret killer that maybe is next door. Is this surprising for a lot of people as you make them aware of it and they realize that that this could exist?
Like myself, who spent over 30 years as an affiliate in the industry that was around real estate, whether it was residential or commercial, where I was in lending, not only banking, but lending. I had never heard any conversations about methamphetamine in real estate, and it wasn't until this happened to me that I learned the impact. And that's what my call to action was, is to really bring this awareness and education out there.
Call to action, let's start there. So the first proactive step we can take is education. How can people out there get involved with your alliance and maybe even partner up with you to spread that awareness?
Appreciate you asking that. I have developed conversations and coursework around methamphetamine toxin awareness and education, not only for professionals who work in industries around real estate, but as well as the direct consumers. So I welcome people to reach out to me. During the pandemic, I partnered with some of the meth testing companies here in the Denver Metro Front Range that had continuing education classes approved, and we did classes online to over 500 realtors throughout the state of Colorado to bring some of this awareness and education. And I'm continuing to do this to get this word out in any industry. One of the big ahas, Gary, that I want to bring that's very important, that impacted me is, although I put all the right protections in place, my homeowner's insurance carrier knew I had a tenant in there, even though it was, not full time or wasn't going to be forever.
Sure.
I had the right endorsement policies to have a tenant in there. I had checked into the property management company on their errors and omissions insurance and all sorts of things, going above and beyond what even the average person would know to do to vet a property management company as well as a tenant. What I did learn is that our homeowners policies do not cover us for contamination.
Unbelievable. So, like you said, the average person out there probably only knows so much. If someone out there suspects that maybe their home needs to get tested, what are some of the red flags to look for? And do you want to make sure you go with a certified tester? And because obviously you get the results back, you're going to be shocked just like you were. And at that point, I mean, does it depend on what state you live in as far as your protections?
Absolutely. And what I learned is only about half of our states have any regulations or laws at all relating to meth contamination. And out of the half that do, I've only found 6 so far that require disclosure post-remediation in a real estate transaction, meaning they do not have to disclose that there was meth there before. So it's buyer beware.
Buyer beware for
right.
sure.
It's buyer beware, and you have to go to either your your county or your state health department for regulations on that. It is on our website. I've put a link on our website to where you can go to a map and then drill down to your specific state, area, community. It all really depends. And look for what their regulations are, if they have any. And if they don't have any, that doesn't mean your family still can't get sick, right? And
absolutely.
That's really you or your family, and that's really, part of why we're here is to bring that prevention ahead of time. So even if there's no regulations in your state, you can look to be proactive and do testing before you purchase a home to ensure that potentially it hasn't had some meth activity in the past, especially recreational.
Especially recreational. I mean, this is an alliance. I mean, really the definition of alliance of people coming together. Really, this is not only education and awareness, but it's an advocate for improved regulations and requirements and legislation. So obviously test it, but we also can kind of do our part in making this aware across the board so that there are laws in all 50 states. Is that something that you're hoping to see as well? Yeah,
we're working on it right as we speak to bring regulations, improved regulations right here in our state of Colorado, which has some of the better guidelines as far as only tolerating some of the lower levels nationally that meth requires. That the standards require that the health department has put into place, but what we're lacking is disclosure post remediation. I went to the experts, and my understanding is my home couldn't be remediated, and I ended up selling it, thinking it would be more of a land transaction, and somebody would bring it down and build something else. And what ended up happening is that somebody purchased it, and they remediated it. They weren't able to get it fully remediated to the state standards, so they were able to follow a process called encapsulation, where they were able to seal in the meth per our guidelines, but then instead of keeping it like they said they were going to, they ended up selling it 5.5 months later, undisclosed, and acquiring all my equity that I had left on the table in 5.5 months. And they sold it to somebody, then they didn't have to let them know that it was previously involved in a situation of meth. And what I learned, otherwise I would have done that myself, right? I would have encapsulated if I thought it was safe, but I learned through the experts that I went through that encapsulation doesn't mean gone, and that my family, myself, could be exposed later on if it seeps back through, or financially deal with the impact of having to re-deal with meth being an issue and having it condemned again by the state of, by my county and eventually the state of Colorado. So it's not a perfect process, Gary, and it hopefully will continue to get improved. And my goal ultimately would be to see regulations where there's a federal mandate, that every state has a requirement, a meth standard, and a process in place, and then ultimately to disclose it in the real estate transaction. Because here's my bottom line. If the state has approved this process, that it was safe for somebody else to buy and then sell, why not be transparent about it? What's the secret? If it's safe, people should know coming into it that they're able to then do their due diligence to learn that it's safe enough for them and their families. Or if there are some possibilities in the future that they may have to deal with, that they go into that transaction knowing that ahead of time and be able to do their due diligence. And that's where I appeal to the people who put these processes and regulations in place, is that if the process is so good and the standards are safe, then why not be transparent?
That is great to push for. I had asked you prior about the symptoms that some people have had from different levels of exposure.
Right.
What have you learned?
I've learned some pretty interesting scenarios. It would range from minor exposure, minor levels, to like skin irritations, eye irritations, to major levels where you could even have upper respiratory issues, especially if you're like my son. I have a son who's asthmatic. If you had asthmatic issues, neurological issues. Children, our pets and small children, they feel the effects even more because their body masses are smaller, and it's like they're on meth themselves. They're neurological and sensory, to ultimately organ issues. I've talked to some people that have been affected significantly in homes and properties where they lived in, and it's affected liver function, kidney function. I mean, you name it, there's no area isolated.
We're very glad to put this word out there and help you get it out to the public as well. I mean, your journey really is eye-opening to many people, I'm sure, that have heard it, but sadly you found yourself, you weren't alone. There's other people who have gone through this, hoping that this never happens to anyone else. Definitely so. Viewers, let's take a look at the bottom of the screen right there. What you're going to see is their website. Honestly, check out the sponsors that are helping to get this out to the public. There's a lot you can do when it comes to education. There's classes they provide. They're even doing basically chat talks as well with professionals. Contact your insurance, make sure you're protected. But really awareness, education, and taking a proactive approach to make sure that you're not a victim to something that can easily happen to almost anyone. Once again, that is Meth Toxins Alliance since 2019. Providing awareness and resources of the devastating impact of meth toxins in our homes and lives. This is Gary Atencio with CNTV, and if you don't know, now you know.